Said the last video, guys, I am in the process of moving, so sad face, sad times. Those boxes are full of books. Anyway, there is a future that is much brighter ahead when I have my new house and an actual office, and I won't be in the basement, and I'll have shelves and everything, and it'll look super awesome. Anyway, I'm here to talk about Ruin by John Gwynne because I finished it several days ago, and I have recovered emotionally, and now I can talk about it. So let's get into it. So for those of you that are unaware, this is book 3 of the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne, and the follow-up series of Blood and Bone I will be starting probably later this year. I'm looking to finish up Wrath next month. And this book, so when I started Malice last year, it's been 7 months. I don't remember exactly when I read Malice. I had some issues with it, pacing-wise, character descriptions. I felt like some of the dialogue was a little clunky. It was John Gwynne's first novel. A lot of that makes sense. But I loved what it was setting up. And it had, good enough characters, good enough action that I eventually really, really enjoyed where it was building towards. And Valor hit the ground running and was a 10 out of 10 in my book. I knocked everything out of the park, made literally everything better than Malice when I read that. And I was, for whatever reason, just didn't continue it yet. I kept making up excuses, reading other books, starting other series. I'm finally back to Ruin in January, so it's been several months. But I'm happy to finally be back in the Banished Lands because this series seriously kicks ass. And if you love epic fantasy and you are not reading this, I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice because this cast of characters is phenomenal. John Gwynne writes some of the best action scenes that I've ever read. He bounces between POVs so fluidly and well. These books are well paced. You actually get emotional and invested in these characters. This is not one of those stories that just follows traditional fantasy tropes. He definitely does add his own spin to a lot of them, such as the Chosen One trope. You see a lot of familiarities with, the foundational pieces in Malice, where you kind of start off with this God War, talking about, prophecy, what's happened in the past, kind of this good versus evil setup. While that's continuing, it's definitely got some twists and turns that I didn't personally expect, and I absolutely love the series for it. Now, Ruin specifically, though, this book takes place immediately after Valor, so I'm not going to spoil this book, don't worry. I know, hopefully, more people are reading this series now, and they can come to this after reading the first 2 books and get some thoughts on this without me spoiling the shit out of it. So this takes place right after Valor, and almost immediately, within the first 2 chapters, you were just thrust back into the war, because this is a continuation of this war that's occurring. You have, the bright star who has been identified, and the black sun who's been identified, and they are warring over these Banished Lands. And from where Valor really ramped up the action and the prophecy, and you really got a feel for where the story was going, Ruin picks up immediately after that, and it does not really give you a whole lot of time to breathe before you are immediately back in combat, which John Gwynne just does so damn well. The battles in these books with the creatures, whether it be giants or wolven or your main cast of characters, just everything is so visceral, and each of these fights, you kind of get a sense that you're there. He does such a good job of making you sort of feel like you're part of the character or you're in their shoes during these combat scenes. And part of the way that he does that really, really well is, first of all, there's a gigantic cast of characters. So you have a lot of names to remember. There's a ton of characters. Don't worry, there's pages and pages of characters and descriptions in the front of the book in case you forget who you're following. But there are 12 POV chapters in this book. And each one of these characters, at one point or another, is likely going to be in combat. And what's awesome about the way that John Gwynne writes these multi-POV stories is you will be in a skirmish or a battle of some kind, whether it be a siege, out in the field, in the forest, doesn't matter. You are bouncing between these POVs, and you're getting a sense of each side of the combat. So you're not just following Corbin into battle. You're not just following Rafe into battle. You're following 6 different characters into battle, and you're getting it from his eyes and her eyes and their eyes. And it really gives you a sense of scale of the battle and the stakes that are at hand, because there are several times in these books where you lose characters and you might be in the eyes of that character when that happens. he's not afraid to kill characters. There are definitely a lot of sort of like B and C tier characters that don't make it through some of these books, but he also takes a few swings at some of your favorites, and they may or may not make it through this either, which is part of why it took me a few days to review this, because I was still recovering. I don't want to get into too many character specifics for spoiler reasons as far as like where their story leads, but Corbin remains one of my favorite characters to follow. He is a fantastic sort of lead POV and gets a ton of screen time. His sister Kywin, or Cohen as the Audible book pronounces it, and I think Philip Chase said it would be Cohen, so Cohen. I'm saying Kywin. Kywin is also incredibly interesting. She is a badass warrior. She is very well versed in daggers and throwing them and stabbing people. Storm, of course, is a fantastic woven creature that follows Corbin in combat, as you already know from the previous books. And I love animal companions. They're some of my favorite things ever. I've mentioned before, anytime I play an RPG, if I can be a ranger, if I can have a pet, I'm there. You have all these, interesting villain characters or sort of like anti-hero characters. Nether is interesting. Veritas is interesting. Lycos, as much as you hate him, is really interesting. Rafe is a douchebag, but his POV chapters are so interesting. Every POV in this book is great. There is not a single POV in this story that I dislike, and that's a feat of its own, because there are other books. I love the Red Rising series. When I first read the continuation of Red Rising in Iron Gold, there were 4 POVs. I hated 2 of them. I mean, it's just, I love them now, but that's just like, it's hard to do. And when you have this many characters, to make each of those POVs interesting and dynamic and different, that is just truly incredible. So my hat's off to John Gwynne for that, because he did that fantastically. This is one of the few times, because I'm trying to take notes for some of these epic fantasy books, where I was just tracking characters and what they were doing, and I just started writing rest in peace far too many times during this book. There's a lot of death happening in this world and in this book, so prepare yourself for that. That is why this book ruined me. That was a bad joke. John Gwynne continues his fantastic writing style, where, of course, combat's engaging. I've talked at length about that, but even the dialogue is well done. Characters like McKean are super interesting to follow. He's definitely one of my favorites, and his dialogue with Fidele are always great scenes. As far as like who he reminds me of writing style-wise, I've kind of mentioned this before, where I feel like he's a solid blend between a Brandon Sanderson, where a lot of what he writes is very straightforward and to the point, but he gives you enough description similar. So like he's kind of between nowhere near like a Robert Jordan or even Brian Lee Durfee, and like how lengthy their descriptions are. I want to say he's somewhere between like a George R. R. Martin and a Brandon Sanderson, because everything's super duper approachable and straightforward, but it's not simple in the way that Sanderson is. It's a little bit more epic. I don't even know a good way to describe this. I love his writing. Far and away, his best attribute in writing, I think, is combat, and I don't know if that's just because of his personal studies outside of it, if it's the fact that he is a Viking reenactor, whatever he does in his personal time, he's always wearing armor and shit. He does some of the best combat that I've read in a story, but it's just, wow. I mean, every time I read a combat scene, you kind of just like, you get going, you get kind of pumped up, you feel like you're watching an episode of Vikings, you feel like you're in The Last Kingdom. It's so intense, it's so engaging. I absolutely love it, and this book is full of it. From a world building perspective, he continues to grow on everything that you've built in Malice, to the point where the prophecy is doing things that I was not expecting. Incredible surprises to me anyway. This has evolved so far beyond just like a traditional prophecy epic fantasy that you would expect, to where it's like, okay, this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, go, like, the good guy's gonna win. I have no idea what's gonna happen in Wrath. This takes a few turns that I was personally very caught off guard by, and it was awesome to read. I'm not gonna get into those specifically, obviously, for spoiler reasons. Aside from that, there's fucking giants that ride bears into combat. If you didn't hear me, there's giants riding bears into combat. Long story short, I love this book. It was definitely a fantastic journey, and I cannot wait to get to Wrath to see how the hell this even wraps up, because the way this book goes, I honestly don't know what to expect. I'm absolutely terrified for a lot of our main characters, because John Gwynne seems to take great joy in watching people just be miserable at character deaths. So, I mean, this is beyond George R.R. Martin. This is beyond a lot of books where no one really dies. I mean, people are not safe in this world. So I am definitely looking forward to wrapping this up and then continuing on to A Blood and Bone to see where this world goes, because I believe that takes place in the same universe, in the same, Banished Lands, but just thousands of years in the future, whatever it is. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. If you're not reading John Gwynne, you are doing yourself a disservice. You absolutely should. And I don't know if Shadow of the Gods is going to have anything to do with this world or not. I don't think it does, but that is coming out later this year, and I absolutely cannot wait for that, because I love this guy's writing. He's definitely an instant buy for me until he does me wrong, which I don't see happening anytime soon. So that is going to wrap this one up, guys. Like and subscribe as always. Do hit up my Patreon if you want to support the channel financially. That is, of course, always optional, but always appreciated. I would love to see you in Discord, though, or in the comments down below to continue the conversation. If you want to talk about Ruin, anything with Faithful and the Fallen, please let me know. There's some people in Discord that gave me a lot of crap for taking so long to get around to this book, and I'm glad that I finally did, because it was awesome and very, very emotional. And that usually does not affect me in a book. There were, I think, exactly 2 books last year that seriously impacted me, and when I finished this book, I just sort of stared at a wall for about 15 minutes. So that's gonna do it, guys. Until next time, keep reading.